Good evening, and welcome to the Fireside Reading Series, brought to you by the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. I'm Peter Borgen, manager of the Hamlin Midway Library. The past couple of years have taken us away from the in-person gatherings that inspired the name Fireside, but we are still so pleased to be able to join you online to share the stories of our Minnesotan neighbors. Last year, hundreds of you gathered virtually for this series, and we are pleased to have you with us again. We look forward to the time that we can again gather at our library and share stories in person. We are excited to share with you that we are working with neighbors and community to create a vision to transform the Hamlin Midway Library into a space that meets the needs and wants of the whole community now and for the next generation. St. Paul Public Library has a bold, community-centered vision for its library buildings to create spaces that are safe, inviting, affirming, and comfortable for people of all cultures, abilities, and communities. At the end of last year, Mayor Carter proposed and the City Council passed a budget that includes substantial investment to transform the Hamlin Midway Library. We invite you to co-create and co-design the library of the future. Visit our website, www.sppl.org, to learn more and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on opportunities to join in shaping the future of this location. We look forward to working with all of you.
Hello and good evening. Thanks to Angie, who is here to caption for us. I will pop that out here just a moment. And doing all of this by myself is fun. There we go. So it's wonderful to be here to have the Fireside Reading Series with Diane Wilson this evening. As we get started, we would like to acknowledge the Dakota people, indigenous keepers of the land from which I'm broadcasting tonight. This land was reserved by the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people as fellow indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe peoples are the original stewards of stories in this place now called Minnesota, and we at the Friends honor that tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state today. The Fireside Reading Series is the Friends' longest running program, celebrating 28 seasons in partnership with the Hamlin Midway Library. Fireside is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and special thanks to our newest sponsor, our neighbors down Snelling, Minnesota United. We're so grateful for your support and your presence here this evening. So we will begin with a bit of conversation and a reading, and then of course open it up to questions from all of you. We will follow up, of course, with a brief survey, so do look forward to that. I appreciate your feedback, as do our funders. We've partnered with Next Chapter Bookseller in St. Paul, and they have created a page with our featured books, and they will be providing book sales at the in-person event at the end of February. So you can purchase the book there. You can purchase also, of course, at any of your favorite local independent booksellers. We also love Birch Bark and Moon Palace here in the Twin Cities. So now I am thrilled to introduce to you Diane Wilson. And yes, congrats on the Minnesota Book Awards finalist designation that was just announced over the weekend. We're thrilled about that. Diane is the author of the memoir Spirit Car, Journey to a Dakota Past, and the nonfiction book Beloved Child, A Dakota Way of Life. Her essays have appeared in many anthologies, including Kinship, Belonging in a World of Relations, We Are Meant to Rise, and A Good Time for the Truth. Diane has received the 2013 Bush Foundation Fellowship, as well as awards from Minnesota State Arts Board, the Jerome Foundation, and the East Central Regional Arts Council. Wilson is the former executive director of the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, a national coalition of tribes and organizations working to create sovereign food systems for Native people. Diane is enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation. So welcome, 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 Diane.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. It's such an honor to be here tonight. I especially wanted to thank you and the Friends of the St. Paul Library for the invitation. I just love this series.
It's so good to have you again. So, as I mentioned, we're going to start with a question because we'd like to set the book up a little bit. When you received the Bush Foundation grant to write about indigenous seeds, did you know that the work was going to come out as a novel, or did you have something else in mind?
You know, I was in that perilous state as a writer where all you know is that you have endless questions. You don't know where it's going to go, and you're terrified you'll never get there. But the Bush Fellowship gave me time and space to be able to think about indigenous seeds and the connections to story, and then also those connections back to community work. So for me, it was part of everything. You know, working for a nonprofit and also trying to gather stories and even grow the seeds themselves and learn from them that way. So the novel was, it was starting to, it was part of that work, but I don't know that it was very fully formed at that time.
Thank you. You mentioned the community work, so I'm just going to flow into this question somewhat naturally, but there were a lot of, I noticed over the weekend as we were getting the results in from the finalists for the Minnesota Book Awards, that there was this real emphasis on books that centered community and interconnectedness and our relationship with the land and the earth. And to some of us, this feels like, oh, about time that this is where our heads are. And these are not just, you know, the gentle sort of, oh, the river, it flows and it is, you know, it is lovely. And, you know, there's a gentle nature book that we, I think, are maybe accustomed to, but these are really clear-sighted in the ways that we're all sort of grappling with that interconnectedness. And do you notice that changing?
Yes.
What do you think is happening there?
Well, I think you know, spending more time at home during the pandemic, we had more time to slow down, to look around us, to pay a little more attention to what happens when human beings pull back and we see animals come out again. We see plants return. We see, you know, we see pollutants levels drop. But we also have that time to go outside and simply re-engage with plants and animals that are around us. And I feel like what we're seeing emerging in literature is a response to that hunger and that need for connection. And part of what I find so disturbing in the way the conversation has been shaped around climate change is that it keeps it in this apocalyptic mindset. And in some ways, I feel like that just furthers the disconnection from our relationship with the earth and everything around us. Whereas if we simply look at those small ways in which you walk outside and observe what's around you, you see well, right now, what's not growing, but you appreciate that dormant time of the season, because this time for Minnesota is really important for the land to rest. And so I feel like this literature, this recalled, renewed effort at relationship is really about finding a new way of taking care of the earth that is not that apocalyptic mindset. I should say this is a new old way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, because there's nothing new about it. The literature's new, but this is a very old indigenous way of being in relationship with the earth.
Yeah, it feels it feels comfortable to me finally to see that that happening in a way that I wanted as a kid growing up, in spending all of that time that I spent in my mom's garden, in the space between the raspberry bushes that divided my yard from my neighbor's yard. They were bigger than me, but it was just completely enclosed, and then waiting for that to come every spring was so much a part of my childhood. But anyway, I would like to get the voice of the book in the room before we dive in. So if you could read from the book, I would love it.
So for those of you who are not familiar, I will, here's the book. And the excerpt that I'm going to read is from the main character, Rosalie Iron Wing. And the novel is actually told in the voices of 4 Dakota women across several generations. So between 1862 and 2002, Rosalie Iron Wing is the main character who actually grew up on a Dakota reservation until her father passed away from a heart attack, and then she was sent to foster care. And then she marries a farmer and has a son. They have a son together. And so the chapter that I'm going to read is this. This is part of Rosalie's life on the farm shortly after genetically modified seeds were just being released. And this is a time of a lot of questions around what was this new development? Was it the right choice? But farmers often face really difficult questions around survival. And I wanted to I wanted to also honor that challenge of trying to be a farmer and take care of your land and take care of your family. So in this excerpt, Rosalie is she's talking to her son, and she is just beginning to learn how to garden. A few months before the first shipment of seeds was due to be delivered, I knocked on the door of Tommy's room. He was a young man now and kept it closed all the time. His deep voice cracked as he called out for me to enter. Inside, clothes were strewn in untidy heaps. A math book was open on his desk, and he sat playing his favorite video game. He looked at me with curiosity. So seldom did I come to his room, except to put away laundry. What's up? Tommy, your father listens to you. If you tell him not to use these seeds, he'll pay attention. Why would I do that? I told him my fears. Then I added an argument that I hoped would spark a memory of what he had learned as a boy. It's not right what they've done to these plants. It's not right to take life apart like that, just because it will make money. You remember when you were younger, and we talked about how the corn feeds the little voles who become food for the hawks, how the sandhill cranes eat the leftover seeds when they stop here to rest during their fall migration. Even the crows rely on field corn to survive. What happens to the birds when they eat these seeds? What happens to us? Nothing, Mom. Nothing is going to happen to the birds or to you and me and Dad, except that for once we'll make some good money. Even you can't argue with that. You might even buy yourself something decent to wear. After that conversation, I barely listened when Tommy and John talked about the farm. I didn't want to give up, not when the Minnesota River was already one of the most polluted in the country. But I wondered if there was a different way for me to do this work. I had tried to be like Gabby, who used her skills as a lawyer to fight threats to the river and the land. Maybe it wasn't my way to fight from anger. Maybe I needed to learn how to protect what I loved instead. For now, at least, that left me with my garden. I poured my time and energy into caring for her, feeding the soil with manure I spread with the shovel, watering the plants by hand. Some days I, excuse me, some days I sang to them serving up a mix of my father's old powwow songs. Once John offered to spray his pesticide to kill the weeds, thinking to save me time. I glared at him until he threw up his hands and said, "Okay, okay, do it your way." And I did, sweating for long hours under the hot July sun, as if my pain was nothing compared to what had been done to the earth and water around me. When all this tender care resulted in an overflowing harvest, I canned everything, refilling the pantry shelves with enough food to last a year or more. After so many years of hot dogs and hamburger helper, I learned to be a better cook by reading recipes and experimenting. The rule of three that had once dictated our meals, meat, potato, canned vegetable, gave way to homemade soups, stews, roasted vegetables, marinated meat that fell apart with the prodding of a fork, fresh baked bread slathered in jam from my raspberries. With the exception of beans, I'd run out of Edna's seeds years ago, buying my garden supply from the seed store instead. I had always believed that John's mother must have been taught how to save her seeds, or maybe she was just smarter than me. Anyone could figure out how to save beans, an easy seed that needed nothing more than shelling and drying. But other plants, like tomatoes, were more complicated. Now, I thought, after nearly 2 decades of gardening, I could save money if I learned how to save my own seeds, and in a small way, push back against our partnership with Magenta. A library book showed me that the tiny seeds I had taken for granted were actually unique living beings with their own history, story, and family. Each seed was made of an embryo, a seed coat, and something nutritious, almost like a packed lunch. The mother plant, like me, wanted only the best for her babies. Some plants, like dandelions, scattered their seeds in the wind, while others, like some pines, needed fire to open their cones. Somehow, the mother knew to dry her seeds almost completely, so they would sleep until the time was right to wake. Each seed held a trace of life that would spark when given water, when given the appropriate conditions. Everywhere I looked, I saw how seeds were holding the world together. They planted forests, covered meadows with wildflowers, sprouted in the cracks of sidewalks, or lay dormant until the long-awaited moment came, signaled by fire or rain or warmth. They filled the produce aisle in grocery stores. Seeds breathed and spoke in a language all their own. Each one was a miniature time capsule, capturing years of stories in its tender flesh. How ignorant I felt compared to the brilliance contained in a single seed. I started with tomato seeds because I used so many of them. First, I learned to ferment them to remove the film that prevents growth. I kept the book open in front of me as I sliced a heavy, ripe tomato and squeezed the inner gel that held the seeds into a 5-gallon bucket. When it was full, I covered the bucket with its lid. 3 days later, I poured off the pulpy water, leaving the seeds at the bottom of the container. After a thorough rinse, I spread the seeds onto a clean screen where they dried for about a week. It was satisfying to fill a clean white envelope with them, labeling it with my name and the date. Then I looked around at the rest of my garden. I had begun to see that when we save these seeds, when we select which ones will be planted again, our lives become braided into the life stories of these plants.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to make sure that my view is not what everybody's seeing so that I can like, you watch me reacting over here and like.
I just think of all the gardeners out there just going crazy, like getting their seed catalogs out. I've got to start planting.
I was just thinking of how this as I was reading this part, I was like, huh, yeah, I just learned to do some of this. And, I've had a little space in my backyard for, 10 years or so. And I just, started to figure it out. So, and the other thing that this part, I think, embodies of the book at large is a certain sort of quietness that sort of travels through the entire book. And there's a lot of, I was really struck by the different kinds of quiet in the book. There's silences, and there's silence between the characters, and there's silence, there's people being silenced. There's these moments where Gabby and Rosie are deeply involved with the process of trying to draw attention to what's being done to the landscape and to the river. And the newspapers won't print anything. And I was wondering, there's without revealing too much, there's a moment that all of this quiet builds to, where it releases in a way that is incredibly impactful. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about that quiet and the silence and the way the book observes.
I have to say that it's something I learned from my mother, all of us. So I have 4 siblings, and that was the way we were raised, is to not only appreciate quiet, but also to know how to listen, and then also to be able to understand what's not being spoken out loud. So there's a language that happens when you are quiet, when you're not speaking. And I think as gardeners, that's the great gift. Not just gardeners, but anyone who appreciates that time outside, is that we get to re-engage with that language that's around us. It's the language of plants. It's listening to the wind. It's hearing which birds are out today, who's traveling through, who's migrating right now, who's not. And so I find that even our quiet is made up of different voices that we get to hear when we ourselves go quiet. So it's a space that's really important to me in my own life. I live outside of the cities on 10 acres, and I just treasure that time being able to listen to those to the other languages around me.
It's a really spectacular way of framing it. That is one of the things that I absolutely adored about reading the book, was that it gave voice to things that I've experienced that I hadn't put words to in exactly that way, or observed on the page, and found just that spark of recognition. And so I appreciate that. Thank you. Dear audience, I would like for you to drop any questions you have in the chat. I certainly have plenty from you when you registered, but please, at any point during our conversation, feel free to do that. And I think, since we were just briefly mentioning gardens, and I know there were a lot of questions from people who registered.
Let's just go there.
Let's just go there. Let's do the thing. What is your garden like, and what are you preparing right now, and do you change it up from year to year?
I do. It changes depending on what I think I can realistically support, because right now this is the dream time. So I think of your plants, your trees. We're all dreaming right now. We're dreaming about spring. And so what happens to gardeners is we get big dreams about how those gardens are going to grow, and the many plants I'd really like to put in this year, and couldn't I move that over here? And, and then I have to think of the reality of what can I really physically sustain, especially in the context of the rest of your life? Because as we all know, the spring is just, we all want to be out there in our, outside, just enjoying being outside again without flesh freezing. And so the prospect of planting is really appealing. It's when you get to July and August, when it's hot and buggy and, all kinds of uninvited guests have arrived to share your bounty, that it becomes a little more of a challenge. So I'm always trying to think both ways, dreaming into what I'd like to see in my garden, and then also thinking about maybe what the soil needs this year. I have been growing this Dakota corn just in a small, I have these are not big gardens, but in a small patch. I've been growing it for the past 3 seasons and thinking, well, maybe this would be a good rest year. Maybe this is a good time to move it around. So I'm in that process, looking at seed catalogs. I save the old seeds that I got from Dream of Wild Health. So the corn, squash, beans, traditional tobacco, and maybe a few other things. But then I also buy seeds. So I'm also looking at seed catalogs. Where do I need to fill in? What didn't get saved last year? So, this is fun. This is the fun time.
It certainly is. And I'm really glad to hear someone who's been at it longer than I have say that even August is difficult, because I think by the time August rolls around, I'm like, weeded.
It's so hot and buggy.
Mary's asking one more here on the gardening. Do you plant the corn with the squash and the beans the way
okay, so here's the thing about the Three Sisters garden, that I do plant them all in the same area. But one thing I realized is that you have to really understand the varieties that you're putting together, so that you have the right corn and the right beans, that the corn is strong enough to support the beans that you selected. And that's so much of the book is really about reclaiming those relationships that we have always had with plants. And so it's understanding very clearly what your corn and your beans and your squash can and can't do together. Because we have, it used to be that you had your family seeds and you knew those seeds really well. And so what I've discovered is that I don't know my seeds well enough, that I haven't, so that the beans that I've been growing, which are, last year it was Hopi, well, we call them Hopi black turtle beans, but they kind of overwhelmed the corn when I planted them too close. So now I've got the beans, I've got the corn, I've got the squash, they're all together, but they're not in the way that, yes, so the sisters aren't strangling each other. You got to figure out a way for the sisters to get along. And it's going to depend on the varieties that you're planting. Good, so sibling relationships, you got to take care of them.
Yeah, that is fantastic observation. And I'm wondering how to frame these questions around Rosalie's response to gardening and her relationship with John and Tommy. And I think that moment. So here I'm going to get a wee bit personal again for a second, but the thing that this book did that I hadn't seen happen before was this sense of Rosalie's younger self knew something that was at the core of her, that as an older woman she rediscovered, but she had this period of time in the middle there where there was so much disconnection. And I feel that happening in myself right now as I'm sitting here in the middle of life. And so I appreciated that very much. But I think if you could talk just a little bit about the way you wrote Rosalie, because she was so real to me.
Mhm. Thank you. I do have a deep attachment to Rosalie as the person who embodied really what assimilation has cost families, Indigenous families. And she was the character that had gone all the way to the edge, where she'd lost her family, she'd lost her language, and she didn't have her community. And even, the way her father raised her so that she would know wild plants, what he did was instill in her that relationship piece. Here's how we are in relationship with plants. Here's how you are taking care of them. Here's how you are honoring them and offering tobacco and prayers. And so she grew up with that piece. But then you see what happens through the foster care system. For example, she's completely disconnected through the trauma of what happens in foster care. And that is one of the themes throughout the book. Is so much of what assimilation has done is in a very controlling, manipulative way, is to separate Indigenous people from that relationship with the land. And it's not just Indigenous people. It's actually this is the way our food system is set up to work for everyone, that you don't have that relationship, that all of those decisions are made on, far away from you. And so by not having that relationship, that's, I think, where that sense, what we were talking about earlier, about that, it's almost that apocalyptic disconnect with the land. But when you start to come back through even just your food, if you have a tomato plant out on your balcony that you're nurturing and tending, and you get to harvest a few tomato plants or a few tomatoes every summer, you have a relationship with the plant in the way that we're meant to. We are meant to be nurturing each other. And it comes down to this really basic understanding that when we take care of plants or seeds or water or the earth, then they also take care of us. And this is a teaching that I see over and over coming through Indigenous writings, that elders teach, that this is what we need to get back to, is we take care of them because they take care of us. And so this is where that's Rosalie's role in the book, is to go from that place of complete disconnect to what it takes to be back in relationship. And it's her story arc that's meant to give hope, that even though we can reach those places of despair, there is, by rekindling that relationship, there's so much healing that happens. There's so much hope, to me, that comes from simply getting your hands dirty, and being able to walk outside and appreciate what's around you. So sometimes people ask, and I know I'm kind of going off on a long answer to this question, but sometimes people will ask, well, what can you do if you don't have a garden? And, I give the example of the tomato in the container. If you can do that, or if you can have an herb plant, but let's just say you can't do any of that, you can walk outside and be grateful. You can simply feel gratitude and express it to whoever's around you, to those plants that are already they're getting ready to set their seeds for the spring. We can simply be grateful in all that we do. So did I get anywhere near the answer to that question?
It was a lovely answer. Please do go on, because that is why we are here.
But that's what Rosalie does in the book, is she carries both, all of them carry sorrow in their own ways. They're all carrying that hard history, but you know, it's rebuilding, reconnecting with that relationship. That is our work. That's part of healing that trauma.
Yeah. So many good questions popping by here. I'm gonna scroll back up, and this was one that came up in the registrations as well. For those who don't know, the structure of the book has multiple narrators and multiple time periods happening in it. So you can see Rosalie's ancestors. You can hear from Gabby. You can hear from of course Rosalie. So Susan is asking, can you describe your process for building this multi-generational tale? Did you start with one character and work backwards or forwards? And did these women come to you separately and only later reveal the connections?
That's a good question. And let me just say it's a very messy process. It did start out to be it was going to be Rosalie's first person narrator. She was going to tell the whole book. But then it was actually a writing exercise that I came up with when I'd been busy in the nonprofit world for a while and needed to reconnect with the story and the characters. So I actually came up with a writing exercise where, because I needed to understand some of the other characters better, especially Gabby and Darlene Killsdeer and Marie Blackbird, who is the character that is 14 during the 1862 Dakota War. So what I did was sit down with a notebook, and I would write their name at the top of the page. And I wrote, tell me your story, I'm listening, which doesn't seem like much, but it puts you in the first person place of writing in the voice of that character. And I was trying to just understand each of them, but what happened was a voice emerged for each character, and they had a story to tell. And so simply from that writing exercise, I then began building these other narrators. And I realized that it also helped me overcome some of those challenges we face with a first person narrator. I could tell the story from different perspectives, and I could also shift the timeline. So it gave me a lot of fun elements that I could introduce and play with. And so I start in the middle. Each book I've written starts in the middle, and then it goes back, it goes forward, it goes sideways, it moves around. I put it all on a big table and I look at it and I move it around. And so, yeah, it's a long process.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I really have done that process of shifting things around in front of me visually, and I find it to be one of the
recipe cards. I swear by them. Yeah, once the book gets too big to hold in your head, you've got to see it.
Yes. Backwards. I liked this one too. When you have a fellowship or a grant or something that's like asking you to write, do you write at all differently than when you're just working for yourself?
No. I think when I apply for grants, it's always with that project in mind that I really want to work on. And so it's coming out of a place that has already been set in some way, because often, you have to submit a writing sample to go with it. So grants help, they really help you plan your way into a project. It's really helped me just figure out, like, what do I need next? Do I need to go away and write? Do I need to travel and visit sites? Because I did spend a lot of time driving around South Central Minnesota. And so the grants have been hugely helpful from Bush and the State Arts Board in particular, to be able to step out of your life and go write just with focus, and no interruptions. So I'm hugely grateful to all of the grants that I've received over time.
Hi, Sun Young, who is asking, who or what are some of your literary influences for the novel?
Oh, that's a good question. One of my, what I call a mentor book, the books that I just study how and what they did. It was Linda Hogan's Solar Storms, because I love the language in it and the way that she was able to bring together traumatic history in the way that her language was so exquisite. She crafted something beautiful out of it. And I've seen other artists do that in other forms. And so her book was really inspiring to me. So that was one of the main ones. And then I read a lot of kind of contextual books for this, but I would say she was my primary mentor in developing this.
Linda Hogan is such a guiding star, and I once fangirled all over her at a conference, and I've kind of been embarrassed about it ever since. I'm just going to
I've done the same
there.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, love her writing.
Yeah, love her work.
Ella is asking more about writing exercises, and I also love asking about other practices and exercises that helped with the process.
Yeah. We all love hearing about process, don't we? That exercise, so I tend to write in a lot of pieces. Like I don't really know where. I just think about what might have happened. So I write that first piece and then I think, well, what might have happened before that to get her there? And what might have happened after that? And then, so the phrase I use, which makes no sense, is building the onion. So that's what my process is. I'm building an onion. So I start with that little core, and then I add layers to it. So I can just continue to, create a whole. And then at some point, you start rearranging it. And I have to say, I worked with a fantastic editor at Milkweed, Joy McGarvey, who, she really helped me see the book. That our first conversation, she said, take out at that point what was about a third of the farm focus, and then she helped me see the holes as I was writing, and was really supportive of this multi-voice process. So being able to work with a really great editor is just, it's such a gift to developing the book that, in your mind, you see how perfect it is. And then it comes out on the page and it's not that. So she really helped me get there through several drafts.
Let us all sing the praises of a great editor.
Oh, I think sometimes we're as good as our editors. And I've been blessed. So, but I didn't, did we say enough about writing exercises?
Go ahead. Talk about some of your favorites.
Well, that one with the characters, it's almost eerie. And I've done this in workshops. It's almost eerie what happens when you just write those few words at the top of the page, and all of a sudden your subconscious opens the doorway to this character's voice. So that is my favorite. And then just, trying to visualize things, doing a lot of I do a lot of travel. So writing exercises, it's more about, for me, recording and then and then writing pieces and rewriting. Yeah.
So it's so important to refine the voices that you're working with in that way, especially when you're dealing with multi voices and in this
and it was my first novel, so I also sign up for classes when I can, online in particular, to go learn some new skills, which is the fun and the terror of taking on a new genre, and especially fiction. It's really there is a big learning curve in moving into fiction, and a lot of just exciting opportunities in the way you can, in the different tools that you get. But it also is a lot. It's a challenge to create a whole world.
How do you find that you answer questions differently in fiction and when you're working in nonfiction, especially self-interrogating narrative nonfiction? But
yeah, learning how to develop characters was that was probably the biggest challenge. Coming from a background of writing nonfiction and creative nonfiction, I place a lot of emphasis on ideas and questions in those forms. And then moving into fiction, the priorities shift, where it's very character driven. And while you can, you still have lots of room to play with themes, it was a big challenge to figure out how to develop characters that can carry those themes, and how can you do that without making it too didactic. Or, I didn't want to get caught up in the GMO polarizing. I didn't want it to be frozen in time where, this is right and this is wrong, and get caught up in the politics. I wanted to tell the story of what has happened in the decisions we've made in the way that it's changed our relationship to seeds, and that shift with Monsanto, and that it is a way of looking at a worldview that really condones taking a seed, which is a world in an indigenous worldview, that's a being, a sacred being, because it carries life. It's a relative. And to condone taking it apart, taking the genetic material apart, to me is a heartbreaking process. And you see it in the corn that now covers much of southern Minnesota. And so that's the story I wanted to tell, was that we see what the Dakota women did in 1862 to protect their seeds, by sewing them in the hems of their skirts. And then we see what's happened a little over 100 years later, when it's now okay to take do this genetic manipulation of seeds, but with the question of what does that say about our relationship, and seeds both for themselves but also as a metaphor of how we relate to the world in general. So asking that big question about relationship, and then trying to show that through the characters' relationships too.
I was very struck by this in the reading process. You were very successful at not being didactic. Before I knew it, I was asking these questions about, so we've got supply chain issues, and if we were all making things happen a bit more locally, we wouldn't have quite as many, it's just all of these things. If you bring it back down into a closer relationship with food and community and care, you don't have some of the issues maybe
Right.
that's, at least that's my hope. That's where my brain
Well, I think
goes.
when you're in that, when you're doing things locally, let's just say you're growing some of your own food, and you're in a mindset of, there's a Dakota saying, "Mitaku ye awasi," which means we are all related. So then I'm in a mindset of, well, if I'm related to you, I take care of you, and that is a very different mindset from, I'm just going to get this for the cheapest cost at, a big box grocery store, and I will have no knowledge of how it was grown or who grew it or how they took care of that plant. So it's really trying to shift and to show, and that's partly why Rosalie was also married to John, who is a white farmer, is to just juxtapose those two perspectives, that these are worldviews that have been colliding against each other since 1492. And there are costs, there are consequences to these decisions that we've made. So so when we think about climate change now, one of the big players is our agriculture.
Yep. Just yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, support your local farmer.
I've got a great question here, going back to the editing process from Mary. So when an editor asks you to remove portions of your text, what do you do with those pieces, and how do you feel about them?
Always a tricky process. In that, so when an editor, especially, so you go through the whole line edits, and this was really more a developmental stage. And what I listen for when an editor asks something like that is it resonating with my internal voice, my internal writer vision of this book? And sometimes an editor will say something and you think, yes, I was trying to figure that out, but I just didn't have, I just couldn't grasp it yet. And so when she talked to me about removing like a third of that, what was the more farm focused period of Rosalie's life, it's like immediately I understood where she saw this could go, and totally embraced it. Like that was a good move. I could see that. And then, so I just pull those pieces out and put them in a file, and then they could always go somewhere else. They could be used, they could maybe be used for a different story, or there might be something in them that could become an essay. We don't throw away writing. We just move it. It's a big puzzle. It didn't belong in the puzzle.
Yeah, and I'll bring this up any chance I get, but I'm just reminded of something that Marcy Rendon said in our conversation over the summer. It's like, I've got a box of murders in the garage. Like, something's going to come up whenever
yes, exactly. Yeah, some other project. Somebody else was talking about, it's the iceberg metaphor of, there's so much that you never see that goes into a project, and what ends up is that little tip of the iceberg, and that's what goes into the book and gets published. So I have, boxes of just notes and research and, unused pieces and thoughts.
All of the things that we don't see when we're holding this lovely, purposeful, compact book in our hands.
Yes, we have to cull.
I think we've got time for another couple, but audience, if you've got anything, now would be a great time. I did have one from the group of registration questions asking both what the most difficult part of the book to write and the most enjoyable part of the book to write.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's kind of an easy one. when Darlene told the story of, she's talking to Rosalie and her son, and she's telling the story of what happened, that about her family story and the boarding school when the children were taken, and then how that, and there is this whole, the trauma that passes down through from boarding schools can manifest, that unresolved grief can manifest as mental illness in our communities. And it was something I just wanted to capture. And so that it was the most difficult because it was heartbreaking, to write the heartbreaking parts of the history. It's like, oh, it's just so hard to put your imagination in that place. So that was hard. I have to say coming up with the seeds poem came out of that writing exercise where I just listened to them too. And that's what they had to say. And then the ending actually came very early on, and I just kept writing to that ending. And so sometimes you get gifts, in the writing process. You're gifted with what is important to be told in that story, and that ending for me was a gift. So that's when you start to feel, okay, this is what the book is about right there.
It was very resonant. So yeah, thank you. And Linda's asking, and I think this is a great way to sort of round things out, are there authors you might recommend, and maybe people who haven't, been quite as noticed yet? Is there anybody you're really watching right now?
Wow. To see, this is when I get the blank. Okay. So what I'm going to do, can I just pitch a book that?
Do it.
All right. So this is coming out on Saturday. Voices from Pejutazizi, which is the Upper Sioux community. This is Teresa Peterson, and I've been working with her and a number of other Native writers in a writing group. And so this is Dakota Stories and Storytellers. So I just want to give her a pitch for 10 o'clock on Saturday, Minnesota Historical Society Press. Another great book that I just read was Jessica Hernandez, Fresh Banana Leaves, Using Indigenous Science to Heal Indigenous Landscapes. Just love it. Love that book. So those are two that are coming to mind immediately. And I just think, oh, there's so many more. We're such a blessed literary community. So I'll think of
Yeah,
I'll think of dozens later. Can I email everyone?
Yes. And I have one more request. Would you read the seed poem?
Oh, yeah, we have time.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I also, if you go to my website, which is dianewilsonwords.com, there's a video poem that I made with Missy Whiteman and my brother's music. So the seeds poem it's titled The Seeds Speak. We are hungry, but the sleep is upon us. We are thirsty, but the mother has instructed us not to wake too early. We are restless, chafing against this thin membrane, pushing back against the dark that bids us to lie still, suspended in a near death that is not dying. We hold time in this space. We hold a thread to infinity that reaches to the stars. The mother gave us patience stronger than our hunger, stronger than our thirst. We dwell in the realm of dreams and spirit. When the sun draws near, we awake and embrace the warmth, fed by the soil and nourished by the rain. When the cold returns, we withdraw once more to rest and to dream. We remember when all of the world had its own song. To know the song was to speak to all beings in their own language. The land told stories of faraway places, of mountains and cliffs and verdant valleys. The mighty river sang its slow course along the ridges once carved by a glacier. Long ago, when the frost was still dug deep in the earth, the humans came. They sang us awake and offered gifts of prayer. They came as humble relatives with a pitiful need to see their children survive. An agreement was made. We surrendered our wildness to live in partnership with the humans. Because we cared for each other, the people and the seeds survived. For many generations, this agreement was kept. Our hunger was fed, our thirst was quenched, our restlessness was fulfilled each time we breached the earth's crust to reach toward the sun, toward the stars. Then came a long silence, a drought of memory, a time of darkness. They came no more, calling us with song and prayer. Still we waited, just as the mother had instructed. The earth kept spinning through her seasons, but the humans did not return. Now our time is almost gone. The pulse of life flickers, dims as the heartbeat slows. We cannot wait much longer. Oh, and Wendy got booted out. I won't take it personally then, Wendy. So, yes, I can email a list of books. I can send it to Wendy and then maybe she can post it. And I think, okay, so I'm going to say good night on Wendy's behalf. I'm going to thank all of you for coming tonight. It was so nice to see familiar names out there in the chat, and you know, just thank you all for being in community together on a cold winter's night. And I wish you all a safe week, and dreams for spring. So dokshta ake, it means till we meet again. Dokshta.